Welcome back, everybody, to the Peak Sports Psychiatry podcast. Hard to believe we're already at episode 6. The momentum is real.
Speaking of momentum, our guest tonight literally runs Momentum Labs. That's right. We've got Dr. Alex Auerbach joining us. And he's someone who's been everywhere performance is on the line. NBA, NFL, NCAA, elite military units, you name it.
Alex is a performance psychologist who most recently served as the Senior Director of Wellness and Development for the Toronto Raptors. And he's now with the Jacksonville Jaguars as a performance psychologist. On top of that, he's the founder and CEO of Momentum Labs, which is scaling mindset coaching from pro sports all the way down to youth athletes and high-performance organizations.
He's also a fellow contributor to Max U, the youth sports mental skills platform you've heard us talk about before. And beyond all the credentials, he's a dad, a husband, and just an all-around great human being.
Alex, welcome to the show. First question. Where are we catching you tonight? Are you in Arizona, Jacksonville, or somewhere in between?
I am in Arizona, comfortably in Tucson, Arizona, where I grew up. And thank you both for having me and for the very warm intro. It's a pleasure to be here and comfortable in my own home with my normal podcast setup. Don't have to do it from Jacksonville downtown Marriott, which is my home away from home these days.
That's good. Do you have any like a pup at your feet, or what do you got over there?
The dog usually lays back here. I'm on my walking treadmill, and this is it. There's nothing better than this. Walking desk, not walking during the podcast, but otherwise usually walking, and that's it.
I wouldn't judge you if you needed more momentum. Lord the dad jokes.
There you go.
So your story is definitely one of grit and reinvention. Can you take us back to the day that you left the Raptors and kind of what was going through your mind? And then also, what did it feel like to leave what many people would call a dream job?
Yeah, you're going to make me relive something that was pretty profound.
Yeah, we're going to go right there. Yeah.
It wouldn't be a podcast with 3 therapists if we didn't just get right to it. Yeah. So, I mean, the story sort of begins before that moment, right? So, my oldest daughter is now 3. I heard you put your 3-year-old to bed before the show started, so I can empathize. My oldest daughter
come back and join us, I'm sure.
I can't wait. And she joined us in August, right before the season started. Usually NBA kind of comes back online right after Labor Day. And so you can imagine what that was like, having a kid and then working in pro sports at the same time. I was still getting calls from the hospital room, and a few months went by, and my partner said, I don't think that I can raise this kid here while you're gallivanting around America on a charter plane watching these guys play basketball. And I thought, that's like a pretty reasonable statement to make. I understand why you feel that way. And so we went back and forth for a bit on, what would it look like to kind of start over and where would we go? And both of us grew up in Tucson, Arizona. And so, we had the choice. Actually, we were talking offline about Austin too, but we were deciding between Austin and Tucson and ended up coming back to Tucson. And so then we made that decision in kind of like mid-January. And then it was just waiting for the end of the season. And really, it was one of the hardest conversations I've had. Loved my job in Toronto. I was incredibly fortunate to work with some really, really brilliant people, but an organization that was really committed to the work that I did and really believed in the value of the work that I provided and was willing to support it pretty much like unlike anything else I'd ever experienced. But I was extremely lucky. My boss at the time, who's now the president, Bobby Webster, he and I talked and he said to me, it was probably the most significant thing that could have happened. He said, I wouldn't think of this as leaving. I would just think of this as stepping back. And it was such a profound kind of like, oh, what a cool reframe to not think of like my sports career is over, but this is a break and a pause. And certainly that's true now that I re-enter the world in Jacksonville here. But it was a very voice cracking, difficult conversation to have because I love the people I worked with. I love the organization. Fortunately, I think in hindsight, the grieving process didn't last all that long because we ended up letting go our head coach like a day later. And I was involved in everything for searching for a new one. So like anything in pro sports, it keeps moving without you. I was lucky to work somewhere that was really pretty neat.
What did those lost periods teach you sort of about identity and performance?
Yeah, each one was in some ways similar and in other ways quite different. I was young when I left coaching and a little older and grayer when I left the Raptors. But I think for me, a lot of it has really been about using that as an opportunity to experiment and gather data like any nerdy scientist would. I think so much of what we're taught growing up is is to pick a path and you commit to that path and you go at it full speed. And hopefully, if you're lucky, find your dream job and you get to work on your passion every day. And that all sounds awesome, but is not really how life works for most people. And a lot of growth is nonlinear. And so I think when you go through a period of loss, when I go through a period of grief or loss like that, what I'm thinking about is like, how can I just try a few new things and see where I find myself feeling most excited or most energized, which is how Momentum Labs came to be really in the context of leaving the Raptors. It was like figuring out that what I really missed was working with a team. And so I found some other people who are going through similar transitions who are also excited about the mission. And we kind of formed a little team. And then we talked about what would it look like to make the second chapter of our careers more about impact and scale versus working with guys who get paid $300 million, which neither one is right nor wrong, is just a different level of operating. And so for me, again, a lot of it boils down to like, how do I just try as much as I can and then figure out what resonates for me? And so I think the lessons for performance are really about kind of holding your identity loosely, not wrapping so much of your self-worth up in the work that you have. And I think, for me personally, that's been quite like a tricky concept because I do derive a lot of meaning from my work and I do derive a lot of like personal value from what I've accomplished and feeling like there's more that I can do. And so balancing that while also not feeling like I am a success or I am a failure because of what work I am doing, I think is challenging, but an important lesson for performance. And I think the second one is to experiment widely. And it's more of like a life lesson, but I think has to do with well-being and overall kind of human potential and human performances. I think most of the time we really don't know exactly what it is we're going to want to do. And it's pretty normal for people to change their minds, even though we don't talk about that a lot. And so for me, a lot of it was really feeling the freedom to do that and creating that sense of agency that like I can create the future that I want to have.
I think it's so cool that you were able to take a beat, you step down from your dream job, figuring out like, all right, well, how is it that I want to impact society the most? You figured out a scalable way to basically teach mental skills to a large swath of youth athletes in America, and it's growing. And for those of you who don't know, I've also referred some athletes to Alex and can attest to his quality. Momentum Labs is about bringing high performance psychology out of the locker room into daily life. Can you tell me, one, how did it grow? What's your vision? Where do you want it to go?
Yeah. So, I mean, a lot of the way we've grown, honestly, is through people like you, Marcus, like organic referrals, right? And good partners like Max Hugh. It's thinking about how do we find the other people who are operating where we're operating and create collaborative relationships where we can leverage the resources we have to both be successful. I'm a big believer. I mean, I feel this way about sports psychology broadly, but certainly feel this way about youth sports, which is really what we're focused on. Like there's plenty of work to go around. And so thinking about how we all work together to meet that need, I think is really important. And there's like plenty of room in the sandbox for all of us to participate. And so when I'm thinking about growing what we're doing, I'm thinking about like, how do we work with people who have similar missions, similar vision, and are passionate about the same things we are. And then I think what we're really focused on is how do we bring these same skills that, the athletes I work with in Jacksonville get to be a part of or get to experience. How do we bring that to 10, 11, 12-year-old kids playing soccer? Because the reality is like, if you can teach these kids these skills at a younger age, not only are you going to help them on the field, but of course you're going to help them in life. There's really not, I was thinking about this earlier today on another podcast I was on, like you're not really taught any kind of self-regulation skills at all ever in your life. If your parents are good, they'll kind of teach you and help you cope, right? But like no one in math class is helping you calm down when you have test anxiety. It just doesn't work that way. And so if we can find ways to give a large chunk of America's adolescents access to mental skills training, I think that's like a pretty cool mission and pretty impactful. And obviously the goal will be to, help alleviate some of the mental health crisis and help kids enjoy sport longer and get more out of it and become better teammates and better leaders. And I think ultimately that's what makes sports psychology so special, right? Is we can have a really broad impact in all sorts of areas of someone's life, and do it in a way that resonates because we're using the vehicle of sport to kind of deliver a lot of those messages.
I think that was very eloquent. I mean, it's so fundamental. Can you imagine being a 10-year-old athlete and part of the training that you're doing is not just developing physical skills, but also the mental side of the game? You'd be so far ahead of the pack from your peers as you sort of age up to the elite level. And this really ties back to our most recent episode that we had right before you with Dr. Sue Schimmel and Maureen Breeze, where we talked about parenting youth athletes and sort of how your role changes over time. And then also just to give a little bit of a plug to Max U, that's exactly what we're trying to scale with an online youth sports platform to take what can be somewhat opaque or mental skills that are definitely tailored towards adults, but boiling it down to a very approachable way to talk with kids, to allow them to sort of understand, okay, yes, this is how I can do some mindfulness strategies or distraction when I'm getting overwhelmed, and do some grounding activities. It works really well, and you can build that age 10 all the way up until 18. You'll be set up for when you go to college. Now I see that Tommy is back. Tommy?
I need some skills. I need some skills on dealing with
What,
anxiety
what, what
while
are we coping
recording.
with, Tommy? What are we coping with over there?
You can see I'm sweating here. This is high stress. Hey, Alex, I don't know you as well as Mark, and you were talking about your journey a little bit. Can I hear a little more? Can we go back? Did you always want to be a sports psychologist? Obviously, you were in coaching. What happened with that switch? Where was that journey? Because sports psychology now is a lot different from what it was 20 years ago.
Yeah, no doubt. So the journey was also nonlinear, right? Like, so the path to sports psychology really came after my sort of first experience of feeling lost after coaching. So played a bunch of sports growing up, but was primarily a pretty good soccer player, though some mental skills training certainly would have helped me in that regard. And became a pretty competitive soccer player at a young age. Made Arizona's first state select team for soccer,
Cool.
participated in some Olympic development training at a young age. And at one point was on like 3 different teams playing soccer from 3 p.m. until 9 or 9:30 p.m. every day. And as you can imagine, kind of burned out of soccer at some point. So I went and played a bunch of different sports. And I played American football, Australian rules football. I played basketball. I was just kind of experimenting again, and really loved playing American football. Thought it was a lot of fun, loved like the strategy, and loved the kind of like chess match nature of the coaching side. And then halfway through high school, my family moved from Tucson to Rhode Island for my mom to get a job. And at that point, I kind of decided my sports career was over. I was never going to be, I don't have the physical stature to be a Division I football player, certainly not to be an NFL football player, but I have a brain I'd like to protect and invest in. And so made the decision, like, maybe now is the time to stop playing and to look at coaching, and was really intrigued by how do we teach and how do we help people learn, and an opportunity to impact, a broad group of people, right? In a college football program, you've got 100 guys or 110 guys on a roster. And if you're doing a great job as a head coach, that's a lot of impact that you can make. And so that really motivated me. So I went and did my senior project in high school on coaching. I decided where I was going to go to undergrad based on what school would let me work with the football program, which just happened to be back home at University of Arizona. I did a year working in recruiting, and then I did a year working on offense. And then between my second and third year, I did an internship with the Rams when they were still in St. Louis, doing some kind of like team operation stuff.
STL.
Finished up my last year doing defense at Arizona, graduated, took a full-time coaching job at University of Rhode Island, and then just burned out super hard. I mean, it was just a wake-up call. Like, I think in my mind I had, oh, this is what coaching is going to be like, and I'm going to get to do all these different things. And the reality of it was, it's not quite like that. Coaching is a real hard profession, and there's coaches are under a tremendous amount of pressure and stress to deliver. And we were not known as a all-time powerful football school, though we won more games that year than we had won in several past. But the grind of coaching just didn't quite align with what I saw for myself in terms of how I wanted to live my life. We were working from 5:30 or 6 in the morning until 11 or 11:30 at night, watching a lot of film. And I just started to think more about, like, is this really the way that I want to spend my time? And so I started to reflect more on, like, where do I derive the most meaning? Where do I feel most connected with myself? Where do I feel like I can do the best work? And a lot of my work, at that time I was 21, full-time coach, coaching guys older than me. But I had a lot of really cool experiences and still keep in touch with some of the guys that I coached back in 2010, just by random relationship building, right? Getting the phone call from the player who wants to get picked up from the bar at 4:15, but doesn't want anybody else to know that they're stuck there, or someone struggling with a girlfriend and wants to know what they should do, or they're thinking about a major. And those were all the conversations I got to have as someone who was kind of like one step ahead of them, right? There, I was almost a peer in some ways, and I loved those opportunities. I thought those were really fun. And so, I stepped away from coaching. I went and did a couple other things, ended up doing an internship with the Kansas City Chiefs. And then right around that time was also doing an internship in sports psychology at the University of Arizona, taking some prerequisite courses, and kind of was deciding between, after the Chiefs, like, do I want to continue and try the NFL football thing again, or do I want to go the sports psychology path? And I think after kind of testing both simultaneously, felt like sports psych would be the right path for me, and really found sports psychology in that period between coaching at Rhode Island and in Kansas City by going to a career counselor. I went to work with someone to help me figure out, like, where would I best fit And about halfway through that process, I looked at him and I was like, I think I kind of want to do what you do. Like what you do is like what I was doing with those players. And he looked at me and said, well, you could do what I do, but you could do it in sports. And that was sort of this light bulb moment where I was like, okay, that seems cool to me. I get to be in the environment I want to be in, but I get to do the helping the way I want to do the helping and have the relationships I want to have. And the rest is history, as they say.
Well, I'm glad you chose the path you did, and I'm glad we're talking. A couple light bulb moments there. I love the introspection you have on your own path, and just trying to get the most yield from the efforts you're putting in. I think it speaks to your competitiveness. It started at a young age. Our paths have crossed a little bit. It's being in St. Louis, a lot of Rams fans, but I
Sure.
grew up in Austin, Texas. I was at Austin Westlake, which is a football powerhouse.
Yeah.
I went to Notre Dame after that, and I was a manager for the football team. So I'm with you on that draw to the sport of football. But as I recall back then, we're talking decades ago, there wasn't a lot of mentors in the sports psych, or certainly not sports psychology space, or people you'd say, hey, I want to be that guy. Kind of found that on your own. Were there any mentors in the psychology space, though, that as you're going through that transition encouraged you?
Yeah, I mean, I've been really, really lucky to be surrounded by pretty smart people most of my career who have honestly helped me avoid a ton of mistakes, which is probably why I sound like I know what I'm doing sometimes. The reality is, my first mentor was a guy named Scott Goldman, who was the sports psychologist at Arizona, right when I came out and came back to do my prerequisites. And I was so lucky that Scott tested me a little bit, right? It was sort of like, hey, I'm going to give you a few assignments. And if you do these assignments, I'll help you. And I think he had done that enough and no one had really come back and done the assignments, but I still had some inner football in me. And so, of course, I did the assignments and that ended up turning into a really wonderful mentorship. I think Scott's brilliant and incredibly talented and has obviously had like a pretty cool career at, Arizona and Michigan and the NFL and now doing it again in the NFL and done some stuff in basketball. And so he was sort of my first mentor. And then he kind of guided me to like, here are the different things you could look at from an education perspective. I won't tell the story. I'll leave it for him in case you guys ever have him on the podcast.
Oh,
But he almost blew my graduate school admission, but we'll let that one go. But I ended up getting into North Texas in large part because Scott was tremendously helpful. And so my second mentor was Trent Petrie, who's one of the more prolific researchers in the sports psychology field, has been doing it for a while. And has set up I'm biased, but it's one of the better programs in the country for training psychologists to work in the sports space. And then probably my third mentor, I had some folks I might consider mentors kind of along the way there in graduate school, but they're more like peers. And then my third and significant mentor there was a woman named Amy Athey, who when I graduated from school, I had the chance to either go be the director at another Big 12 institution or come work at Arizona. Arizona was interesting because it was home and I had been here. But the real draw was a chance to work with Amy, who had been at Oregon and interviewed for several pro jobs. And I think Amy is brilliant, left Arizona to work with SEAL Team 6, kind of brilliant, and is really just sharp. And it helped me avoid a lot of mistakes that I'm sure I otherwise would have fallen squarely on my face with. And so those have been a few folks who have shaped my career and helped really make this path possible. And I think what I brought to the table was the football side of things. And I think that's always been a unique angle for me, is having lived the experience of coaching. I mean, even the head coach now in Jacksonville coached at Rhode Island a year after I was there. And so we have a lot of the same circle.
oh,
We have a shared experience with the same head coach. Like we kind of know what that's like. And so that informs a lot of my work with coaches, of course. I think one of the challenges a lot of sports psych folks had faced maybe like a decade ago was getting in. And I had already done that part. And so it was sort of an inverse situation where like I could shed some light on, well, here's what it might be like to build that relationship. And I did that, for example, at North Texas, where they hadn't had a chance to work with football. And then when I came to school there, it just so happened that one of the defensive coaches was a guy I coached with at Arizona. And so it was just a quick phone call, like, hey, do you want some help? And that established a relationship that continues now. So it's been a mutually beneficial, I would say, kind of mentorship relationship with these folks, but they've been instrumental in me being where I am and thinking the way I think and getting the chance to practice the way I do.
You mentioned Dr. Goldman, if he's listening out there, hey, Dr. AIQ, when are you coming on the show, buddy? We'd obviously love to have you. We'll get there. And I do want to hear the story about how you nearly blew your admission to North Texas or whatever.
That's
um,
a good one.
yeah, speaking of mentors, one thing that I also do need to give a plug for a little bit is our Tommy and I, our collective mentor, Dr. David McDuff, who's sort of the grandfather of sports psychiatry. At some point, he'll also be on the show, but he was a guy who really pioneered the field, having he was the addiction psychiatrist at two different places in Baltimore. It's kind of the right place, the right time when the Browns moved to Baltimore to become the Ravens. And at the time, there had been an issue, I think, with addiction on the team, and the owner and the ownership group recognized that there was a need to really address that. He went from just being an addiction psychiatrist who had a military background, and he learned by a process of treating by walking around, is how he framed it, which really lent itself to walking around a locker room. And he ended up being the team psychiatrist of the Ravens and the Orioles for decades. He also worked at the Colts for a little bit. But anyway, Dave, if you're listening, thank you again for helping Tommy and myself and what we do now, and kind of how we sort of went into it as a little bit backwards, working pro level before going into college. Anyway, pivoting, I do want to ask Alex. So, I mean, we were talking a little bit about Momentum Labs while Tommy had his MIA moment.
Small
Tell me,
seizure.
yeah, that's fine. Tell me about what's going on with the AI sports psychology tools y'all are putting together. Are you actually building an AI sports psychologist? Because if so, that's incredible. I would love to learn more.
So someone has built a few tech people who are smarter than I have built an AI version of me.
Of you, though.
Using some of my content. But in all seriousness, yes, that is something I'm working on. I think what I'm trying to figure out is I'm not a believer that AI is ever going to replace anything that we do. And I think AI, for all the pattern matching it can do, is really just generating new patterns. It's not like doing all sorts of creative matching yet, and maybe it'll get there. But I do think people still ultimately want like a human experience and to feel connected to a person. And so I'm less convinced that AI is going to replace us, but I am pretty convinced that in the future, the best practitioners are going to be leveraging AI, particularly to help them within and between sessions. And so that's something I'm thinking a lot about. Like, how do we give, say, young athletes an opportunity to interact with a mindset coach or a mental performance coach or a sports psychologist or a sports psychiatrist between sessions? And obviously not for like mental health care. There's all sorts of risks that come with that. But there's lots of use cases that don't really involve mental health care that could still be useful. You know, someone's feeling a little bit nervous for a game before a game, or they forget their homework from session, right? Like these would be things that would be quite useful to have something to interact with and help you chat with. And even in my own experience right now, if you're up for experimenting with AI, like one of the things I'm doing a lot is journaling in ChatGPT. So I've created a little project that I uploaded some different therapy books to and some of my own work, and I just write to it. And then I ask it to give me feedback and share non-obvious insights. And it's just kind of like a cool process to learn a little bit more about myself and see what something else thinks about me. Of course, it makes mistakes and, you know, it does whatever else it does because it's still learning, but it's an interesting experience to have. And I could see, you know, in a future not too far away, athletes at most levels wanting something like that in between session, again, to, you know, nudge them about the work that they're doing or encourage them to practice that mindfulness or even surface the mindfulness exercise right as it comes up. And, you know, I'm consulting with a company right now called Mastery that's using AI to develop custom visualizations. And we're working with a lot of pro athletes. And, you know, it's a really powerful tool because you can kind of like jump in and say, you know, here's something I'm struggling with right now and get a guided imagery to manage that right now. And I think that's what, you know, it's almost like just in time intervention, right? People want something that they can do right away. And I think AI is a pretty good use case for that.
Gosh, that's super cool. I think we could spend the entire episode just talking
Yeah.
about that. One follow-up to that in my observation from what you're describing. And I love that you're a nerd and you're looking for data points because that's kind of what you're talking about. But it might accelerate our work. You know, you talk about using it in between sessions. You talk about coming up with guided imagery examples. What about, is it helping you form a better therapeutic alliance with the executive, with the player, or to understand the learning differences between, you know, if you put a profile of a athlete and their coach, and does that help accelerate the work with the use of AI?
Yeah, I mean, I think right now in my practice, I haven't gotten that sophisticated, but I can definitely see a world where you're taking disparate personality profiles, let's say from a coach and an athlete, and you're asking AI to use a specific framework to synthesize that data and give you some recommendations for how these two could work effectively together. Now, Of course, you got to train the AI on what data to look at, and you got to, dot your I's and cross your T's, right? Or it's going to tell you to do something that you don't want to do. But I think there's a really cool way to use it. And I agree with you completely. Like, I just think the rest of the world is moving in a direction where AI is going to be involved in pretty much anything that goes on. When you see it already, like if you're a Google subscriber, now your email has AI, like AI is going to touch every part of your existence at some point. And I think it's prudent for us to think about, well, how does it touch the work that we do and how do we use its powers for good? So I think that's a great use case. I think for coaches, it's, hey, I'm thinking about this specific defense, or I'm struggling with this part of my self-care. What can I do? And for players, it's, hey, I'm having a hard time with my teammate. Give me 3 recommendations for ways I could address this conflict, right? Where I can maybe get some outside the box thinking generated by something else that's got a lot of data points. I think that stuff is pretty cool and pretty creative, and when used for good, can be quite powerful.
Yeah, and equitable, right? Everybody's got access, like you said, at your fingertips. My kids are using it. Let's see, my 15-year-old is, my 13-year-old, my 11, my 8, my 4-year-old is not using it yet, though, but he will, I'm sure. It's a game changer. I think it's almost kind of an unfair advantage, or will be if you're using it versus not. I think as a physician, I open up a medical record. I have to write in the record, hey, I used AI to generate this note. I think in the next couple of years, we're going to have to document if we didn't use AI because we're at a disadvantage, right? So expanding on that, you've described high agency mindset as another unfair advantage. I'll make that transition for elite performers. Can you define high agency for our listeners?
So agency, or the way I think of agency, is, you'll hear my competitiveness come out in this, but it's like really the
Let's go.
belief that you can kind of bend the world to your will, which some ways can be quite healthy, and in other ways, if not channeled appropriately, obviously has its downsides, like any strength. But when I think about being high agency, I really think about being like the author, creator, generator of your own life, and feeling empowered to take the action steps you need to take to make life happen the way that you need it to happen for yourself. And I think it's an interesting contrast in a world like sport, where spirituality sometimes plays a big role for athletes in the way they understand their performance. And I've obviously worked with athletes who have this sort of like let go and let God mentality. And I think there's a time and a place for that too. But the way I think about it is, if you can have some sense of agency and ownership over what it is that you're doing, that tends to be a better place to live for most people. If you feel like you can make an impact, if you can control your outcomes a little bit more, and then you start searching for things you can control and things you can influence in ways that are different from folks who are sort of sitting back and letting life happen to them. And so, I'm a big advocate for people taking responsibility for their own outcomes and for what they want to achieve, and for trying their best to bend the world to their will, because I think you're much more likely to get what you want in that regard.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring that up. Dr. Schimmel and Maureen Breeze last episode talked a lot about managing up and sort of taking responsibility as a youth athlete, about advocating for themselves to their coach and actually asking those questions that the coach kind of wants to hear unconsciously, that to allow for their situation to improve. It's like controlling the controls, all of those overused terms that really do still matter. I think that's great. So what are the first steps that someone, say a 14-year-old athlete or even a corporate leader, can use to flip that switch related to high agency?
I think there are a few things you can do. So first would be to kind of get clear on what you want in the first place, right? Like, I think a lot of times, unfortunately, at all levels of performance, really, like, people are kind of going through the motions. I mean, you'd be surprised, as I'm sure you two know from the work you do, right? Like, the number of people who just sort of like end up somewhere, right? Like, I was tall, and they gave me a basketball and I could dribble it and I shoot it well. And then they're like, hey, you should go to the NBA. And like, because I'm a freak athlete, like, that's just sort of where I end up. And obviously that's not a bad place to be necessarily, but that's also not like you exercising your agency over the world. And I have worked with several players in the NBA who, it's like, I never played basketball until I was 17. And then someone spotted me and I was really tall. And next thing I know, I'm getting drafted in the second round. Now, that's great. That's exciting for you, but also life is kind of happening to you, right? And so I think first is getting clear on, like, do you want to go to the NBA? Do you not want to go to the NBA? And there's some really cool stories of this too in sports, right? Like, I think the most recent one is probably Myron Rolle, who, was an NFL player, but was also a Rhodes Scholar and went to do all these other things. And there was, I think it was a Baltimore lineman, right, who recently got his medical degree
Yeah.
also and has been really clear on wanting to be a doctor. So I think like getting clear on this is what I want to accomplish, I think is really important. And then turning that into a practical plan, right, and steps that you can take. I think the second piece is like learning the skills that you need to learn, the mental skills you need to learn to make those things happen, right? So if you're a person who, say, tends toward pessimism and negativity, right, perhaps learning to be more optimistic and figure out what you can control or what you can change is a good skill in getting closer to that sort of high agency perspective. And then I think a lot of the same kind of mental skills we think about, right? Clarifying your values and understanding how you move toward those most effectively, learning to deal with the difficulty that comes up, like no path to being who you want to be or getting what you want to get is going to be a yellow brick road, right? Like you're going to have some difficulty. And so learning how to cope with those things, I think is also part of that kind of high agency mindset.
Yeah, when you look at those values and you're doing that inventory with a client or an athlete, I'll go back and maybe challenge that. I think you said sometimes a person will say, let go and let God. We see a lot of very faith-filled people, and maybe it's taking account of those talents that they have, so they're not burying them. Not to get super religious, but I think there is like that something to tap into there of almost, hey, I've been given something and I better do something with it. And then there's some freedom in that as well. So I guess how much of it in your experience is kind of your own willpower to get something done, which can lead to burnout or can crush you if you find failure with it, versus kind of taking that mindset of, okay, there's a plan for me, but I have to do my part in my agency to fulfill that. Does that make sense?
It does. And honestly, I think both work. Like I would describe myself as a spiritual but not religious person. And I think there's a ton of benefits to spirituality. And I think there's a ton of benefits to religiosity broadly, like when you channel healthily, like anything else, right? And I think, a lot of it for you is like you're describing, Tommy, it's the relationship you have with that kind of experience that then dictates what you do. And I think there, like anything, right? And this is my view, but like anything, there's both good and bad. So if you want to think of it as like there's a plan for me and my responsibility is to live into that plan and walk that walk and fulfill my responsibilities with the talents that I have, I think that's a very high agency pathway forward because you're taking ownership of fulfilling that, right? I think if you take the stance that, well, there's nothing I can do and whatever happens, and people, by the way, who are not religious also take that stance, of course, like that's not a high agency pathway. And that doesn't make high agency good and non-high agency bad. But it does, in my view, mean you may get different outcomes and they may not be exactly what you want depending on which path you take. I mean, I do think if you really want to make something happen at the highest levels of whatever it is for you, whether it's becoming a physician and a psychiatrist or becoming a psychologist or working in pro sports or being a pro athlete, like you are going to have to exert some control and you are going to have to be pretty intentional about it. And so if you believe that that's going to make a difference, it's going to be much more powerful than you going out there and thinking, well, it doesn't really matter how much I do, or whatever happens. Like, okay, sure, but that's not a recipe for, ending up in the NFL.
Well, there's too many distractions in life, right? If you don't focus, you're not going to get to where you want to go. Is it easier then, and I'll stop asking questions about this, but I'm fascinated by it, easier to work on this with a 10-year-old, a 14-year-old, someone whose brain's not fully developed? Is it, too late when you're a 25-year-old pro athlete to work on this?
I don't think it's ever too late, really. I think obviously the older you get, the more experiences you have that may shape how hard or easy it is to find that sense of ownership and agency. So of course, if you can start young, it might be a little bit easier, but I don't think it's ever too late. And I do think you hear stories of people who go through some horrific event later in their life or a tragedy and through that process find like a tremendous amount of personal growth. And I think a lot of that post-traumatic growth comes from exploring who they are and feeling like trying to regain a sense of control over that experience and actually exerting some control over that experience and then figuring out like, okay, this isn't all so bad. So I don't know that it doesn't have to be age dependent, of course, but obviously it looks very different, teaching a 10-year-old from a 17-year-old from a 27-year-old how to do that. But I think the core kind of principles are probably the same, right? How do you help people look for opportunities to take control? How do you help people take accountability? How do you help people align their actions with their values? How do you encourage them taking risks, even if it means they might fail, so that they do get the experience of like, oh, I can do some things that are hard and I can actually change the outcome if I take a risk. And I think, you might encourage a 10-year-old to do that differently than a 30-year-old, but ultimately I think you can encourage both.
Well, I'm going to take a step back for a second. Based on, controlling what I control, I really wish I was
There you
more
go.
taller. That would have been really
Same.
nice. So speaking of tall people and basketball, so you worked in the Raptors front office and you're now with the Jaguars. What are the biggest differences in your mind between NBA culture and the NFL culture when it comes to mental health and performance?
Well, interesting question. I mean, look, honestly, like I've been extremely lucky that both organizations have been pretty progressive in the way that they think about the work that I do. And so in some ways they're quite similar, but I think both organizations are a little bit unicorns in that regard. And
That's
honestly,
awesome.
I'm not sure I would have taken either job if they weren't that way. I feel a little lucky in that regard. But I guess broad strokes, NBA is a much more player-driven league, though the NFL is kind of coming around that way. It's a more relaxed culture, I would say. And I think a lot of that's a function of how many games you play. And I think when you play 82 games, you just can't ride every win and loss like it's the beginning of your year or the end of your year.
Yeah.
But in the NFL, where you get 17, like if the first 4 go bad, your year might be done pretty quick. And so everyone matters a little bit differently than it does in basketball. And so I do think that drives a little bit of cultural difference. I think football, broadly speaking, is a little bit more almost like militaristic in organization, right? Very ordered, very structured. When I was in the NBA, it would be frustrating at times, but there would be nights that our head coach would decide the schedule for the next day after the game, right? So it's like 11 p.m. and we're figuring out what we're doing tomorrow. Football, like I look at my calendar for the Jaguars and like I know what I'm doing in 3 weeks, and so it is different in that regard. And there does tend to be more like command and control in football than there does in basketball. I think, again, there's lots of things that go into that schedule, CBA, all those kinds of things. As it pertains to like mental health care, I think the NBA was pioneering in this regard with players speaking out more. And I do think there is something there's just 5 guys on an NBA floor at any given time. And if you're a starter, you're known by pretty much everyone who loves basketball. And so to have guys like DeMar DeRozan or Kevin Love or John Wall come out and talk about mental health and what they struggled with, I think does resonate differently from, a left tackle talking about it. Even if the left tackle from the Philadelphia Eagles talked about having panic attacks before games, and like he's a Hall of Fame player, but most people couldn't tell you who that is, right? Dak Prescott's talked a little bit about it, but that movement I think came a little bit after those NBA guys. And so I think the culture is a little bit maybe more open in the NBA and maybe a slightly further ahead, again, broad strokes, but like in Jacksonville, I'm extremely lucky. Like, our team has, put myself, and I do that work with another practitioner who's extremely talented. Like they put the 2 of us in front of the team and are like, you give a talk now, tell them what you do. We're integrated into everything that goes on. I'm working with the front office on, draft decisions, trade deadline decisions, roster decisions, work sports medicine on player health and performance. We're working with coaches on how they're showing up. But I think that's really a function of how special the organization is and maybe less emblematic of football culture, though I do think it's changing. I think you're starting to see, and there's a ton of talented practitioners in the NFL. I think you're starting to see that kind of become more of a headline and become something that players are really looking for as part of their experience. And you're seeing that for sure in college now. And I think it's just a matter of time before that happens in pro sports where, a part of a player's decision to go to a specific team is going to be about the resources that they have on the people side. In college, I know that's happening because that was happening when I was at Arizona still. I mean, people were bringing me into recruiting meetings just to say, like, look at what we have here. This is special. And I think you'll see that in pro sports soon enough, both in the NBA and in the NFL.
Did Mike Clark come right after you at Arizona?
So I brought in Rachel Webb, who was Mike's boss. Rachel's now the sports psychologist with the Charlotte Hornets and one of my all-time favorite people. Rachel hired Mike, but I got to supervise Mike when he was at Arizona.
Awesome. That's very cool. All great people you just mentioned.
Yes.
So you're talking about DeMar earlier. Yeah, that Dinners with DeMar podcast is amazing. And anytime they want to do a little bit of cross promotion, let's go.
There you go.
Yeah. So along those lines, what's one misconception that people have about pro athletes' mental health?
So the first, I think, is that it's as common as people think it is. I think this is sort of like a paradox of the stories you've seen. But for all the times we talk about, an athlete struggling with panic disorder, or they're depressed, or, they're dealing with intense anxiety. Like most pro athletes, I don't believe are struggling with mental health that much broadly. That doesn't mean mental health concerns don't exist, but I think because of the way we've talked about it in the media, I think there's this tendency to believe that like 80% of pro athletes are struggling with some mental health
Yeah.
concern. And that's just not the case, right? Like these guys are and gals are at the absolute tip of the spear in what they do. And quite frankly, it's like very hard to be dealing with severe mental health concerns and also
Correct.
be at the tip of the spear of what you do. So I think that's one misconception. But I think the dark side of that misconception, if you will, is that these guys then don't struggle with anything, right? And so the other misconception is like life is perfect and there's no concerns. But of course, that's not the case, right? No amount of money protects you against people telling you that they hate you and they wish you were dead on social media, right? Doesn't matter how much money you make. If you get a message like that, that's going to affect you. And so I think people don't understand the severity of some of the things that these players do deal with and the intensity of some of what they're having to manage and navigate. And that doesn't mean they're all struggling with severe mental illness or significant mental health concerns, but just like the rest of us, right? Their mental health is impacted in the ways our mental health is impacted. And so I think we kind of missed the mark on that, broadly speaking.
Yeah, so stigma has declined because of the athletes. I think you mentioned that the more high profile, the more effective they are at decreasing stigma and getting awareness out there. This is a vulnerable population. How do we educate the public as practitioners, though? Because some people will say, wow, you work in elite, sports, professional sports. What is the message we should have about athletes? And, a lot of times I just say that these are just real people. And we can look at the statistics, right? You've got in the general population, maybe 1 in 5 are going to have something significant related to their mental health that they want to address. Maybe not at severe major depression or bipolar, but it's something. I think the danger I see is that because there's that other side of it where these people are perfect, they're put on a pedestal, there's nothing wrong with them. Their image is so important because social media and branding is so important that I don't know. I think kids often are attracted to that despite the fact that the stigma is getting better and people are receiving services. But I still think there's that kind of like they're not quite pros, that they don't feel like they have the agency to speak out, and maybe they're just caught in a place where they don't feel like they can get the help maybe that they need, or let's wait till the end of the season, let's wait till it's the off season and I can deal with it. But maybe that puts them behind. What do we tell the public as sports psychologists, psychiatrists, and that's a balanced perspective about what exists and how we manage it?
Yeah, so from the perspective of like educating them about the experience of high level athletes, right? I think the first step is, like you said, Tommy, it's recognizing like these guys are humans first, right? Just like the rest of us, like they have a mom and they have a dad, and they have siblings and they have loved ones, and what gets said to them or what gets yelled at them in the arena, right? It affects all of those people, and it affects all of us. Like no one is immune to that kind of criticism or contempt or whatever it might be. And so I think recognizing that they're also going to have a different set of experiences, but ultimately the full range of human experience, I think is an important part of educating the public on what's real for these people. And I think it's just hard for people sometimes to relate to that because the fame and the superstardom and the financial side of it like makes it seem almost like surreal and superhero-esque, right? And I get that. And that's part of what we're trying to do in pro sports is entertain and create a little bit of that mystique, right? And so I think helping people see that that's part of it. And I think obviously athletes can help themselves by participating in things that make them seem more human. You mentioned DeMar's podcast, like Ryan Clark does one that's really good and very human too. So there's lots of attempts out there to sort of show the humanity of these people. And I think slowing down and kind of connecting with that's really important. And then I think kind of like more broadly, how do we educate the public on what we do and why these things matter? I think our field, like psychology broadly, has done a pretty poor job of helping people understand how we work and what the purpose of therapy is, right? And I think there's still work we can do on clarifying how these services are best used. And I think one of the hills I'll die on is one of the things that drives me a little crazy is, a lot of practitioners measure their worth or success by the number of people that come to therapy. And this is a pretty common metric in college systems, for example, like, we saw 50% of the student athlete population. And that's what administrators are asking for, right? They're saying, well, how many kids are you seeing so we can justify keeping you here? But this is the wrong question to ask. The question is not how many kids can we get into therapy? The question is how many people can we keep out of therapy? The goal is not to get people to come to therapy, just like athletic training, just like sports medicine, right? The goal is to keep people healthy. It's not to keep people in a position where they have to keep coming for services. And so I think helping the public understand that like, this is really about giving you the skills that you need to like leave the nest and go be successful, right? And this should be a place that you come when something's up and you need some help, and then as a place that you leave and you come back to when you need more, but you leave and you go live your life, I think is a much healthier and more appropriate stance to take. But I think so much of the way people have been indoctrinated into thinking about psychology is like you lay on the couch and the therapist takes out their notebook and you talk about your childhood, and there's a time and a place for that. But I think in the world of a lot of the work that we do, right? Like putting things together and getting them out there as quickly as possible is really important. And so I think we also need to change a little bit of the model and the way that we think about mental health, because you're not successful if you have more people in therapy. You know, if you're in a college athletic system where 50% of your kids are in so much distress that they need help from a mental health practitioner, that is a system problem. That's not an individual athlete problem. And those are the kinds of questions we need to be pushing to solve. And I think the kinds of things we need to be thinking about and helping the public understand that they're a part of that system, right? Like you are, as a fan, part of the system that's contributing to that experience. And that doesn't mean you individually have done something hurtful or hateful, but it does mean like you're part of that culture and you have a responsibility to try to make it a healthy, happy experience for everybody, not just for yourself.
Gosh, amen. I agree 1,000%.
Yeah. So okay. You talked about utilization rate in college athletic departments, which we will touch, no doubt, at some other point. You talked about in the Players Tribune and Blindsided, not specifically, but just as far as like places that athletes now have a voice to be able to talk about mental health concerns in a safe way. They're just humans who happen to be extremely good at sports. You know, when I'm working with folks, it's like you got to check your ego at the door. Like I appreciate and I'm athlete informed and I understand the culture and I recognize that you are very good at what you do, but like that's not what we're going to be talking about right here. Like, yes, I work within that system, but you're a human and you have daily struggles like anybody else. You're one in five, like all the other people. It's just you happen to be a part of a vulnerable culture that has been underserved because you use the word like superhuman or whatever, kind of viewed by the public to create that mystique, because it's helpful to nearly the general public to think that there are some people that are a little bit bulletproof, in my opinion. But as far as like within that college athletic department and utilization rate, you're correct. Like 50% of the athletes are needing mental health care. That's not good. That being said, there should definitely be someone around who can speak their language that they can feel safe going to if they're having those concerns. And Tommy and I've talked a ton about the difference between having someone embedded versus having someone at the college counseling center as far as to go to, because they may not feel comfortable going to that person. Anyway, I'll get off my soapbox there. Going towards something that you and I are both connected on, which is Max U. I love that shared connection. What drew you to youth sports specifically? I mean, you and I are both fathers of young children. I know Tommy's got a bunch and he's a little bit more advanced there. And I'm jealous that he's been able to do the adolescent sports parenting work. What drew you to youth sports as a place to make impact?
A few things. So first was my own experience as a youth athlete. Thinking back on my experiences of pretty terrible coaching, to be honest, because the American system has no real standard or education put in place for coaches, and that's not true in other places. And so, not to disparage any of the three of us, but like any of the three of us could go sign up to coach soccer at our local Little League tomorrow, and it'd be fine. Of course, I'd prefer one of the three of us doing some coaching to some of the alternatives, but the reality is like that's how coaching happens here. And so I think I had some experiences as a youth athlete where, it would have been really helpful to have somebody else available to be like, hey, is that okay? Like, how do I deal with that? How do I work with this coach more effectively? And I think second is really for me, I think this is a tremendous opportunity to impact the broader mental health crisis we're seeing in kids. And it's just one vehicle for that. Tons of other ways that you could do it, right? You could do it through music or the arts or even in classrooms itself, but a lot of kids participate in sport. And so if we can find something that they love and they're energized by, and then give them some tools that help wrap round that experience out and make the experience itself more enjoyable, but make life in the long run much more tolerable. I think that's a pretty powerful way to do it. And so that for me was what youth sports was all about. It's like, how do we scale the impact of what we do and give kids the tools that they need to be successful?
Yeah, you're making me think of the Boy Scouts and Cub Scouts. I volunteer with them, and it's the only place a kid can be outside and be free and have the freedom to kind of navigate the world the way they want to without somebody yelling at them. But sometimes I have to yell at them. If you had to design the perfect youth sports experience, the ideal youth sports experience, what does that look like if you got to get specific from a mental health standpoint?
Gonna say, man, you're about to we need another hour and a half just to talk through the ideal sports experience.
We'll
I mean,
spare you.
I think there's sort of three parts I think you have to think about, right? So first is coaches. I mean, so I think it's educating coaches on mental health and mental health literacy, getting coaches to understand the importance of mental health and mental skills training, and helping them think about creating psychologically informed environments. I think even at a young age, so much of what's happening is psychology, right? It's communication, it's interpersonal relationships, it's learning, and these are all psychologically based processes, right? It's all human behavior. And so getting coaches the foundational knowledge they need to be successful, I think would be step one. I think step two would be parents, right? And a lot of parents are obviously a huge part of the youth sports experience, and giving parents the tools they need to manage their own stress and pressure and anxiety and the keeping up with the Joneses experience that comes with trainers and everything else that goes on, right? Like helping parents understand the realities of youth sport, that like your 6-year-old has a 0.001% chance of becoming LeBron James. So you probably
Are
shouldn't.
you sure?
I am
There's more
positive.
zeros, more zeros.
And so I think just being realistic and helping parents understand that, and then helping them understand kind of time and place for intervention, right? You hear so many stories of athletes who struck out in a baseball game, and the first thing that happened was dad berated them from behind the plate. That's not the experience we should be creating for our kids. And frankly, I don't know any parent who, when they reflect on it, is like, that's what I wanted to do, right? But it's just the emotion of it all overcomes you, and it's hard to see your kid fail, and all these things. And so giving parents the skills and tools that they need to self-regulate, and also helping them understand this is what your experience might be like, and here's how you promote positive mental health in this space. And then I think third is the athletes, and it's probably some kind of structured curriculum that clubs go through, right? Whereas, look, we're going to teach you how to take care of yourself. We're going to teach you how to regulate your nervous system. We're going to teach you about your attention. We're going to teach you about these cognitive skills. And if we can give you that full range, like, you'll be able to enjoy sport a little bit more.
All right. This has been an incredible conversation. We're going to move to our lightning round.
All right,
quick,
let's do it.
Quick hit questions. And so, like, keep it brief. A few words. Question one, what is your favorite arena or stadium atmosphere that you've ever been in?
I know it's supposed to be rabid, man, but I've been in a lot of cool arenas. Probably the Rose Bowl.
Oh, that's a good one. Have you been to the parade?
No, I haven't been to the parade.
Okay.
Specific game at the Rose Bowl?
I've been to several games at the Rose Bowl, but I think going to the actual Rose Bowl was pretty special.
Actual Rose Bowl. Awesome. All right, next one. Pre-game or pre-talk ritual that you swear by?
For myself, yeah, probably listen to music. For athletes, I think listen to music too. I think music's a really powerful tool.
I love that. Okay. What's one middle skill that you personally lean on?
Journaling.
Okay. You already explained it. I love that. That's great. Tommy.
All right. Next, dream dinner guests. So you're having a dinner. Let's think athletes, coaches, leaders, sky's the limit.
How many do I get?
Let's go 5.
Okay. Mike Krzyzewski, John Wooden, Don Staley, Roger Federer, Michelle Obama. Let's round it out.
Wow. I love that's
What a
diverse.
group.
And I love the tennis in there too, right, Mark?
Yeah.
Federer.
We're
Some
a little
coaches,
biased.
some individual performers, different spheres.
Nice. All right. You
That
were
would
talking
be a
about
fun
music
one.
earlier. What's your go-to hype song before a big presentation?
Enter Sandman by Metallica.
Yes.
Classic.
I may or may not have seen Metallica in St. Louis 2 nights. It was great.
Amazing.
All right,
Yeah, that's why you looked rough, Mark. I saw you after that night 1 or 2. I think.
It was great. It was worth it.
It was worth it.
All right, last one. Biggest lesson that your daughters have taught you about life and or performance?
It's way more fun when you're just doing what's right here.
Amen. Live in the moment. So I'll take us home. So that was extremely fun. We always love hearing those quick takes there at the end. It's a good reminder that even at the highest level, athletes and performance coaches are just people with their own quirks and routines.
Exactly. But before we wrap up, we always like to zoom back out. We've talked about your journey, your time in the NBA and the NFL, which I'm very excited about, and the work that you're building with Momentum Labs. Now we want to leave listeners with something, a little bit of a bigger takeaway.
So let's shift gears for a second into some few closing reflections, the kind of lessons that parents or coaches or athletes can all walk away with. So if you had one mindset skill you could give to every youth athlete in America, what would it be and why?
Mindfulness, probably. I think it's, of all the mental skills, to me, is like one of the most, I don't know, I think of it as like a pivot point for the rest of them, right? It's about being present. It can be used as a regulation tool. It can help you connect with your values. It can help you with the cognitive strategies. So it's like a pretty central thing to learn how to do, and I think can be quite powerful.
Amazing. All right. How do you personally measure your success these days? It's no longer did we win the championship. So what tells you that you're on the right path?
I think usually what tells me I'm on the right path is if I feel like excited about what I'm doing during a given day and I feel energized by what's going on and like I've accomplished something. And so if I can go to bed every night and look myself in the mirror and feel like I did something useful today, that's how I'm keeping track of my success professionally. And I think personally, this may sound silly, but like I keep a little streak counter of several things that are really important to me. And I just try to make sure that those things happen every day. And they're little things like connecting with my kids or writing notes to them or writing notes to myself, but holding myself accountable to doing these things that I know are meaningful and over time kind of compound a long-term success, I think is really important.
Yeah. And using AI to keep you accountable too when you're
Always.
putting those streaks in the journal.
That's right.
Finally, where can people find you? So Momentum Labs, and where can they learn more about that institute?
So you can learn about Momentum Labs at momentumlabs.coach. The website's www.momentumlabs.coach. If you want to learn more about me, you can find me at alexauerbach.com and all over the internet at Alex Auerbach, PhD, LinkedIn, X, Instagram. Would love to connect with folks. Feel free to reach out. I answer all of my emails and all my LinkedIn requests. So you can reach me pretty easily.
Oh, yeah. Alex, this has been an awesome conversation. Thank you for walking us through your journey from leaving the Raptors to building Momentum Labs and now bringing that high agency mindset to the Jaguars. It's inspiring to see how you've turned challenges into new chapters of impact.
Thank you guys for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here. It's a reminder, whether you're in pro sports, youth sports, or just showing up at work, these mental skills matter.
And for listeners, if you want to learn more about Alex's work, check out Momentum Labs online, like you mentioned. Keep an eye out on the incredible projects that are coming through the Momentum Labs Institute and Max U, and we'll link all of that in the show notes.
Don't forget, share this episode with a coach, a parent, or a teammate who could use a little boost, and hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. Reviews help too. They keep us climbing.
Episode 6 is in the books. So until next time, keep your mindset peaking.